time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And good moment. Welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
With Barnet Bain. Good moment, everyone. Freeman, you're sounding a little bit out of town, out of state. So wherever you are, I guess you're up in Northern California. Greetings from...
Yeah, not quite out of state. You know, they will eventually divide California in half because the people in Northern California and Southern California tend to like the idea that they're going to have their own statehood at some point.
Well, that's great. They can fall in line behind the Quebecers who just took a referendum, and that idea is not going so hot anymore, but that only took 40 years. So, lots going on. Imagine that. I've been talking and thinking and writing and ruminating a lot about imagination, and I'm eager to share something that came up. I was reading something about Montezuma and Cortez, and this inquiry about how it was that Cortez managed to annihilate Montezuma so quickly with only a few hundred men, when Montezuma had a few hundred thousand warriors. And what fascinated me about this is that there was some speculation about the nature of the culture. The Aztec culture was an imaginal culture. They were very committed to what is called synesthesia. You know, where that's the interrelatedness and the cross-folding of all of our senses. We hear colors. We still have remnants of that sort of thing in our culture. We talk about cool colors and warm feelings. So we still sort of blend these things. But they were fully engaged in this imaginal world in which they understood themselves to be a part of everything. And so I was reading about some speculation that it may be that they simply were not able to handle the possibility of like duplicitous behavior.
Sure. Because
they would be witnessed by the forest and witnessed by the leaves of grass and, witnessed by the sun. And so it was unthinkable. It was not in the consciousness of an Aztec to make the kinds of decisions that the Spaniards were able to make because they were answerable only to their own thinking. They had already been separated. Right. From this sense of animism, from being a sense of being a part of the oneness. They were more separate. So I was fascinated. I was fascinated by that, and fascinated by it that I had to bring it with me into the studio this morning. So now you get to be fascinated by it too, and if you don't, well then we probably lost it. We probably lost a few people.
It'll die quick. No, I love it. I think it's really a brilliant sort of snapshot of the way in which the consciousness that you and I promote, this idea of moving towards a sense of the oneness, the sense
a reconnection with
interconnectedness.
Well,
right?
there's as all things interconnected mirror back and forth. It is no accident that our guest today is like the perfect guy to have on to explore these matters a little more deeply. So we have with us Bill Harris, who some of you know as the creator of Holosync. He's the founder and director of Centerpoint. Some of our listeners are aware of that film, The Secret, and Bill was a featured teacher in The Secret. He's taught thousands of people how to become more fully engaged with a co-creative reality. I'm hesitant to use. I'm so stale on this whole law of attraction language, but because I think it's so brittle that it parses out the imagination even more than putting it back together again. So if ever there was somebody on our show who could put Humpty Dumpty back together again,
we'll give it to you, Bill. Welcome to the show.
It's Bill. We're glad you're here.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Great. Bill, speak a little louder. We're as we know, both you and Freeman are calling in from outside, and I hear from our producer that you're both coming in on the same pipe, so we're both going to have to speak a little louder.
All right, I can certainly speak a little louder. Is that better?
That is fantastic. Now, you have spoken about something that I just love that is absolutely to this point. You talk about the black and white game, and which is absolutely about how the oneness gets shattered. So why don't we jump in? There's so much to cover here, but let's jump in there.
Well, the interesting thing about the game of black and white is obviously it's a metaphor for a certain aspect of the human condition, but it really drives it home to people. The game of black and white is something we teach all new human beings as soon as they're old enough to learn. First, we teach them the names of all the quote-unquote things. You know, this is a ball, this is a cat, this is a dog, and all that sort of stuff. And so then people begin to, there's an underlying premise there that, there's a whole lot of separate things. And so that becomes part of the way we look at the world. Instead of seeing it as one big interconnected thing, we see it as a bunch of separate things. Then we learn the main rule of the game, which is that some of those things are appropriate and good and desirable, and some are inappropriate and bad and undesirable, and so we divide everything into these two general piles, and then we play the game, and the main rule is the white pile, the good pile, white must win. So we spend our whole life trying to get rid of black and to get more of white, and the irony there is that white and black are defined in terms of each other, so there's no way to it would be like getting rid of buying and just having selling.
Yeah, no heads, only tails. And what I love about this is that in the beginning, these are all functions of the imagination. So we have it threads back to me to the Spaniards and Aztec story. You have two fundamentally different worldviews, completely different worldviews. I'm not making one better or less. I'm just looking at both the black and white game and the Aztecs and Spaniards game as symptoms of some sort of disintegration, and the flip side of that is so much expressed in what we do here on this show and what your work is all about is how do we put Humpty Dumpty back together again? We really do have to understand these pieces. How did we splinter it up?
Well, there's another aspect of this that complicates it even more, because it's not so much putting it back together again, although I understand what you mean by that. It's the fact that you have to play this game. It's not that some people learn not to play, because if you don't prefer your children over somebody on the other side of the world, you won't take care of them. If you don't prefer your car over any other car, you won't take care of your car. You won't come in out of the rain. You won't take, people, it's a survival thing to have preferences.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where, the Buddhists talk about, the middle path. Somehow you have to be attached enough to be alive,
mm-hmm.
stay alive, and to have some juice, some fun, some interest in your life, but not so attached that you're playing this really intense, hard version of this game of black and white, where you're beating your head against the wall, trying to get something that can't be changed, or that is only bad, quote unquote, in your own mind. Get rid of it. I mean, all of these are just good and bad are just ideas about reality. They aren't intrinsic qualities, but we act like they are.
Well, and part of though the opportunity in recognizing in a culture that hasn't been playing by the same rules. Barnett, you bring up the Aztecs. I've often referred to the Moken, and the Moken are a tribe off the coast of Indonesia that became the subject of a really interesting investigation by the 60 Minutes crew because in the tsunami that happened, I think it was in 2000, might have been 2001, none of the Moken died. And so the 60 Minutes with a French anthropologist went out there to find out why they didn't die, and their answer was ridiculously simple. They said they moved to higher ground, and then asked why they moved to higher ground. They said, well, the animals moved to higher ground, so we did too. But that wasn't the part of the conversation that I thought was fascinating. The Moken are nomadic people, and they don't value material possession. In fact, they see material possession as a burden because you have to carry it around. So whatever they build, they leave there. And they travel between, I think there's 12 or so islands there that they travel between. And the interviewer asked a really interesting question. He said, so the Burmese government, which is a military dictatorship, had taken over a couple of the islands. And he said, well, aren't you worried? And it was fascinating because that was not a word that they had in their vocabulary. There's a number of things. I mean, they didn't measure time. They didn't have there's a number of things. But what I think this speaks to is the rules, as it were, of the game, life as they saw it, were distinctly different. So different, they were unfathomable to someone who's been playing in the game that you and I and Barnett have been conditioned in. Does that make sense?
On the other hand, you could say they are also playing the game of black and white. They just had the piles chosen in a different way, in a way that was incomprehensible to the Spaniards, and the way the Spaniards were playing were incomprehensible to them.
Exactly.
But I think one of the reasons, I mean, obviously the Spaniards won because they had technology, but also because they were more willing, they were more flexible in being willing to behave in certain ways than the Aztecs were.
Yeah.
They were willing to do, it's sort of like a child throwing a tantrum is willing to go to greater lengths to get what they want than the parents, and often the parents give in. So in some ways, the person with the broader range of possible behaviors, not putting any value judgments on whether the behaviors are desirable or not, but I think that's one of the reasons.
That sounds absolutely on point. I mean, the larger the menu of options, the more power one has. Even, and I'm talking esoterically. You just have more energy available when you are able to perceive and conceive of more potentialities. The Moken thing is particularly interesting to me, Freeman, because you mentioned that they had no language for worry, that worry was not a concept. And inside of how we take the imagination and parse it down and parse it down and parse it down, we parse out a particular relationship with reality that is out of the moment, that is not in the present. Now we begin to ruminate about the future, obsess about the past, and from that we're capable of having worry. So worry, to make a distinction about worry, we have worries. Worries are always about the imagination, full on. It's always an imaginative act, as opposed to a lesser kind of worry, a less frequent sort of worry, which is the worry that comes up in the moment as a response to a clear and present challenge. But we have, as part of our A and B conditioning, we become virtuosos of slicing and dicing the imagination and then labeling it, and then we enter into a relationship with futurized, imaginative permutations of the black side of the checkerboard.
Well, and of course, you can also use that same ability to do abstract thinking, imagination, that sort of thing, to do wonderful things too. It's not always on the negative side of things. And on your point about worrying, not only do modern people worry more, they also then worry about worrying. They're worried that they're worrying too much, and
it's a chronic tape loop.
Yeah. So a lot of my work is about how do you get people out of that, and most people try to use willpower to get out of these things. I have found that the only thing that really works is awareness. There are all these cognitive events that are going on in people's heads all the time, worrying being just an example of one of them.
Well, I'm worried.
They're happening on autopilot. And when people, for instance, meditate for decades, they develop a kind of awareness where they can see when they are doing something that is not resourceful.
I got to jump in. I'm worried that we have to take a break right now. We're gonna have to hand it over to our sponsors. We will be back with Bill Harris. We're going to talk about worry, awareness, mindfulness, and a lot else. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
Thank you for staying with us. We're back here with our guest, Bill Harris. Freeman is calling in from his view of the Golden Gate Bridge, and I'm here in a basement in Ventura. So
the bunker, we call it a bunker.
I'm here in
There's
the
never
bunker.
an attack, that's where you want to be.
Here in the bunker at Gold Coast Broadcasting. So we were, before we broke for the commercial break, we were about to explore something about awareness and about mindfulness. And Bill, I can feel that you have something that you've been saving for this very moment that's going to come up extemporaneously that has never been said before.
Well, to go back to the Aztecs and the Spaniards, one of the other reasons why the Spaniards won in that is because they did have a larger perspective of things. They were developmentally more advanced. I'm not saying they were necessarily morally more advanced, although they weren't doing human sacrifices as much as the Aztecs were. But they,
you can't tax a dead person. You can't tax a dead person.
That's right. I don't know if they were they taxing. I guess the Aztecs were taxing people. They took over a lot of the surrounding tribes and were getting tribute from them.
Yeah.
But they also did a lot of human sacrifices at periodic feast days or holy days.
They knew how to play ball. Those ball courts. But I don't want you. I'm responsible for digressing, and I don't want to pull you down my path.
Well, anyway, maybe we should get back to awareness, because I think this is one of the most fascinating things I've ever come across, is just the idea that a human being tries to regulate him or herself through willpower. And what I've found really works is increased awareness. The fly in that ointment is that it isn't that easy to increase your awareness. The traditional way of doing that has been to sit for 3-4 hours a day for 30 years. And I know Zen masters and people that have done that very thing. And they are extremely aware, and they can see how they're creating their moment-by-moment feelings or behaviors, or which people and situations they attract or become attracted to, or what meanings they're assigning to what's happening. And I just happen to stumble on something that does that quite a bit faster, because it employs modern technology to create the same changes in the brain.
So what would be the relationship between the technology enhanced, and that's an understatement, I realize that, I don't want to mischaracterize it, but we don't really have language for this sort of innovation. But the relationship between a technologically enhanced mindfulness practice.
Well, you really have to understand, they've done a lot of studying in the last 10 or so years about mindfulness and what happens in the brain. And there are very distinct changes that happen in the brain. Increased gray matter, neurons devoted to mindfulness, increased white matter, which is the glial cells that connect the neurons, and increased connections between something like the amygdala, where all our emotional reactivity happens, and the frontal lobes of the brain, where our executive control happens. So mindfulness has a signature in the brain, and whether you become more mindful by watching your breath go in and out for several hours every day, or you do it by, as we do here at Centerpoint, by giving the brain an audio signal that causes the same patterns to develop in the brain, the result is the same, and people begin to see things and see how they're doing things internally, like in a way that they weren't seeing them before. And so I'm always saying to people, meditation creates awareness. Awareness creates choice. And once you have a choice, you'll always choose what serves you. And if you're more developmentally advanced, you'll include what serves other people also. Some people that are not very advanced developmentally are pretty much all about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's my little mantra. Once you have enough awareness, you have choice over the things in life that we do have a choice about. There are things in life that we don't have any choice about. Everything's impermanent, and we don't have any choice about that. We need certain conditions, or we die. We're very sensitive. I don't know about you, but I've tried to control everybody else so that they would conform to what I wanted, and I have not mastered that.
Well, we do think we are trained in the as a subset of the AB game that we can outthink life, that we can outthink nature, and that we are separate from it, and that we may pay a certain kind of lip service to, yes, I am part of nature, but we don't really believe it.
Yes, and there's huge consequences to doing that, to trying to somehow, quote unquote, conquer nature, or
our own nature. Try to conquer our own nature rather than become relational to it and aware of the forces that are operating, the developmental forces that are operating as part of our own nature.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Because when you're just have the awareness to watch what's happening as it happens, to watch the things that are usually happening outside your awareness, then you just know what to do. In fact, I was just reading something the other day that was describing these changes in the brain, and this was as the result of meditation research. And I noticed that they were describing a flow state.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, when you're highly aware, you are in a flow state, which really means that you're flowing with what's happening around you instead of being at odds with it, because you're saying, well, this isn't happening the way it should be, so I have to fight against this or readjust this. And when you get in that state, everything just seems to be significant. It has meaning. This is what people lack when they're depressed. They don't see any meaning in anything. When you're aware in this way, everything you see seems to have meaning.
Well, this tracks back to the ability to imagine more than a very small menu of possibilities. Again, if we've been organized into these small compartments with these limited number of chips, then everything tracks back to that. So there's a combination of things. One is recognizing that the control game, as it were, is, first of all, not going to be effective, and it interrupts a process whereby something more fulfilling may occur, but there has to be the ability to hold more complexity, a more dynamic and complex worldview.
Yes, for sure. We have certain attractors that we experience that are windows into the more complex worldview, or the more dimensional worldview, or the more realized worldview, however we want to hold this, however we want to speak of it. And that's beauty. I mean, beauty is always a crack into the more of what is possible, and it is always always resolves certain kinds of. It resolves the A and B game. We don't necessarily look at beauty in terms of, well, that's white or that's black. We look at it as the resolution of these paradoxical energies. Either you look at something gorgeous, or a thoroughbred coming out of the gate, or a beautiful sunset, and you think, well, that is both peaceful and exciting, or it's serene and exuberant. It's simultaneously. It lifts us outside of this duality experience into something more, something.
And that's about an imaginative capacity.
Yes.
Because again, if we're crunching everything down and we're in this mindset, if you will, of holding things in this very narrow way, the ability to see that beauty, the ability to recognize, or even more importantly, to organize towards or direct our attention towards complexity, which is, of course, Barnett, something that you and I have talked about and been practicing, which, Bill, it's my perception of Holosync and the work you've been doing is it promotes a state of tuning into a kind of this expansive imaginative capacity where we're more likely to organize towards beauty and to perceive it.
Yeah,
is that accurate?
The mind, the human mind, as a survival instinct, divides things into this and that. It creates the appearance of duality when there really isn't any duality, and there's a survival reason for doing that. However, we live in this multidimensional universe that is constantly changing all the time. It's way too much for the human mind to get around, to get to grok, or whatever word you want to use. And so we create these internal caricatures of reality. There's a famous statement, the map is not the territory, because any map that really described the territory accurately would be the same size as the territory, and then what good would that be? So the problem is people make these maps of reality in their head, and then they forget that it's just a map of reality, and they think that their ideas about reality are the same as reality. And, the only way that you can really experience the multidimensionality of the world is to have the mind become very quiet, so you're not processing everything through this thing that splits it into duality. So somehow you have to have the ability to go in and out of that, because you need the splitting into duality in order to survive, but you need the other in order to, like you were saying, notice the beauty in the world, notice the fact that it is this big, one beautiful, flowing thing event that encompasses the whole universe.
So it's interesting because you're using sound to do this. I personally use nature to do this. So for me, a walk in nature is very organizing, right? It helps me really move through the duality in my own experience. Is sort of, and Barnett, you alluded to this earlier, the tendency towards worry and then worrying about the worry. So there's a way where in nature, with the now there's every sense is alive in that realm. It organizes me very back very quickly to a kind of flow state. That's when my greatest creativity comes out, and so forth and so on. Is that akin to the state of consciousness you're looking to evoke?
Well, the interesting thing is that in the Csikszentmihalyi Mahali's book, Flow, I remember him describing this guy.
I love that you could say that.
Yeah, I practiced. He was talking about this guy who worked in a factory, and he was like putting a bolt on something, tightening it for 8 hours a day, and the guy was supremely happy. He was he had somehow figured out how to be in a flow state when he did that. And so, it's easy to be in a flow state when you're out in nature, unless you're lost and don't have any food or something like that. But to be able to be in a flow state in any situation is really the result of developing a brain that has more neural connections between the left and the right side of the brain, and that has a certain structure that happens to people when they meditate long term. Most people don't have the time to do, that's why we love Holosync so much, because it brings the same benefits about 8 times.
Well,
faster.
we don't generally throw our enthusiastic support behind a tool or a product, but we do in this case. Holosync is an extraordinary tool for bringing us into a more intimate relationship with who we think we are and who we can be. And so we want to give you the last couple of minutes to say a little bit for our listeners about where they can learn more about Bill Harris, about Centerpoint, about Holosync.
Well, if you can just go to our website, centerpoint.com. Centerpoint has an E on the end, so it's the word center, the word point, one word, but with an E on the end of point. If you Google Holosync, HOLOSYNC, you'll probably see all kinds of baloney from some of our competitors who are trying to diss us, but you will find us that way too, probably.
It's a remarkable technology. It is. It's really an astonishing product.
You know, I was. No one was more surprised than I was since I started doing this on my kitchen table, just out of interest in this research that I found that allowed me to create this. That it spread, eventually spread all across the world. We've got about 2 million people in 193 countries using this now, and become quite a phenomenon.
Well, it's wonderful, and for our listeners, you can also catch up on this if you've missed it off of our site. We'll have information about this, and. Bill, it was fantastic to have you with us on Cutting Edge Consciousness. We look forward to having you back again. And maybe if you're in Los Angeles area, you want to come in, we can hang out and do a show live in studio.
That would be a lot of fun.
So we'll save that. And Freeman, you want to say goodbye to Bill?
Yeah, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today and playing in our sandbox. It's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you today.
Well, I got some sand down the front of my swimming suit, but I'm going to go take a shower and I'll be okay.
You'll work that out. and for those,
it was fun, guys.
Thanks.
Awesome. And for those of you listening, we invite you to stay tuned because Barnett and I will be back after the break to wrap this up.
We're going to talk about Bill behind his back.
That's right. We're talking about Bill and all the sand we've created here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnet Bain. Fun stuff.
Yeah, really fun stuff. Interesting man, and lots of wisdom there, lots of insight there.
One of the things that Go ahead.
One of the things that's really great about Bill is if any of our listeners want to want to follow up on that, he gives away so much information that is so broken down so beautifully and so elegantly and so simply, and it's complex stuff, and he gives away so much of it. I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of this sort of practice and that sort of practice and this sort of background and that sort of background. And it's so interesting. I find myself periodically getting lost in all of the free newsletters and things that he gives away, and they're all fascinating.
Yeah, no, there's tremendous value in his work. I love any time that people are looking at technology from the standpoint of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, technology has changed our world in such dramatic ways that, today, looking back, it doesn't take many years, 6 months ago to a year ago, and looking at things we do today that have become such a major part of our lives, and looking at the possibility that technology can really be a part of, in this case, evoking a consciousness that allows for a greater sense of choice, more flow. It's fascinating because one of the things about technology, going back in history, something, for example, that Benjamin Franklin said in, I guess it was the late 1700s, was that with all of the industrial advances, he saw us working only, let's say, 4 hours a week or 10 hours a week or something. And this has been repeated many times throughout our history. But more often than not, the small story of growth for growth's sake and the technology has not given us more freedom. Yet, I hold out that in this particular vein, technology used in this particular pursuit
Mm-hmm.
will actually deliver on that, more so than any robotics or mechanized ways of trying to, again, control and dominate our experience. So it's an interesting point I want to make here, is that, this may be the great promise of technology. When we use it to help us get more into a flow state, then it really is in alignment with greater freedom, more so than technology that's simply designed to simplify a daily task or something of that nature.
Wow, I think you're absolutely right. Also, goes with that is the same awareness that goes with every other experience that is to be had in the world, and which is that they can be lifted into expansive potentials, or they can be drop to constricted, not so warm and fuzzy potentials, and that's true whether we're talking about technology or any other choice or any other decision that we make, whether it's an outer world expression or an internal choice or decision or belief or assumption that doesn't go outside of our own thinking being state. There is a lightness and there's the white square and the dark square always, and with everything.
That's the game.
Yeah.
It just depends on what game you're playing. I mean, again, I think this is the big opportunity, is recognizing the game. This is the awareness Bill was talking about that we've been playing in. And, Barnett, I think you and I are really working on creating new rules, if you will, to a new game, a new, more expansive game. So, I mean, really, it does track back to, am I crunching this down again, everything that I'm doing, or where I'm directing my attention to the small story game, or am I expanding into a more a broader game of possibility and preference for my life?
Yes. Yeah. Really well said. Yeah.
And it's interesting because as much as we, at this point, I think you and I both kind of struggle with The Secret, not because the content isn't fantastic, I think it is, but just, again, how quickly people organize it back to a small game, which unfortunately undermines much of what it has to offer, right, as consciousness material. But the ability to use that technology and that wisdom and evolve it from the smaller game to really a bigger game. It's really powerful. It's interesting to watch the people who participated in The Secret, and I don't know how many years ago that was. I'll have to scratch my head and think about it. I'm going to guess it was 10 years ago.
Probably 10 years ago, I guess. 5 or 6, I think.
Yeah, because it had such a powerful impact at the time, because it initially, I think, appeared to people as a secret formula for winning at the game, the old paradigm game. And while, okay, there was a short-term maybe way in which that did play out, the evolution of it is more towards its true, the true gift of the consciousness behind it. Which is, I think, what we've been talking about so much with so many of the people who we've had on who were actually in The Secret, right?
Well, one of the discoveries that we increasingly own, have to own it and then re-own it and then re-own it. It's never banked once and for all, or maybe it is, but I'm certainly not there yet. I have to rediscover it, that the next thing I learn, the next insight that drops in, the next piece of this infinite puzzle that gets placed for me is not an ultimate solution. That I don't, even the mindset that there is something to be solved. I heard myself, catching myself in that slip. That's also an expression of a particular kind of way of holding my relationship to all that is, that there's something that needs to be solved. So there's always another truth, is what I'm getting at. We get a truth, and then it is true until the next truth. And for one thing, the secret, as powerful as it was and continues to be, it's all relative. That was certainly a new and powerful truth, the highest possible truth for many at the time. And then the truth is, and which was that you completely create your own reality, and you do. I am 100% aligned behind that thought. You do create your reality 100%, no caveats, no holdbacks, 100%. And as I come to understand that, I realize I don't. But
right.
I don't. I co-create it. I receive it. But there isn't the jumping past. There isn't a jumping past that. And so you have a truth, and it is absolutely true until there is a superseding truth, and that is absolutely true until there is a superseding. So right now, I realize I create my own reality, and I don't. And there will be a superseding truth to that too. It's beyond my ability to perceive it or conceive it from here.
Yeah, no, it's great because look, the again, what I was saying previously is that when the first orientation towards directing our attention in a positive way to generate a positive outcome, in the initial thing is it's still organizing back, at least in my experience, to winning. Right, the game and the winning, and so words like financial freedom and abundance, and it's organizing back to my small story of winning, until the experience of being able to achieve more with less effort out takes me beyond the small story of winning. So it's almost like we're going through the games we've learned to play it with principles that are bigger than the small story game, and in some very, sort of magical way, the principle rules the day, and it takes us through almost like a portal and out the other side to go, wow, this principle is so much bigger. Then the paradigm where it's not a winning game becomes more realizable. I don't know if that's even language, because the principle kind of showed us that, or because there's also where the principle crunched down to this small story of winning, works at first and then start bumping up against just how limiting the story is, in which case we realize we got to change the game. The principle is 100% right on. It's the small story game that's got to change.
I love that. Yesterday morning I had this really great breakfast talk with Sandy. And we were talking to the first cousin to that point. She'd had this dream, and we were talking about the dream. And what emerged from this is, we do have this. We're programmed. We have developmentally. It's part of the programming to win. And the moment we're winning, there's this idea that there is a subject, me, and the object, the world, and I'm winning. But life is messy, and if I make the leap for a second that it is all imagination, and it is all imagined, and it is all like dream stuff, and it's all enchanted, and it's all one thing, that there's not separated, it's all one thing, and that I am in the one thing. Viewing it in the way that, as one facet of a diamond that doesn't know it's part of the whole diamond. But if I know that I'm part of the whole diamond, then my life and the life of everything around me is all one thing. And so it cannot be, it is not to be figured out. It's a big, glorious, messy thing that spills out, and to the degree that I learn to embrace that and flow with it. It's a fundamental reimagining of my relationship to life, to all that is. It's big and messy and all of a piece and not to be figured out. And the part of me that wants to figure things out does a disservice. But to learn how to learn how to flow and do what the Buddhists say, as Bill was referring to, this spontaneous right action that emerges in the moment without having to figure things out and over-plan and over-care and over-strategize in an effort to shore up my resources in order to outthink, outsmart life. I know there are many who are listening who are ready to take a different point of view, and that's fine. I intuitively understand that life is not going to be outthunk.
Right. It's interesting because what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, where the worry almost takes on a life of its own, and it's the worrying even about the worrying, and how we run down that path, and our world becomes very tight and very rigid and very stressful. The opposite is also true, where as we start to play with mystery and we start to play with these imaginative faculties, and we imagine ourselves imagining, and it's almost, the other, like the path going in the exact opposite direction. Not to diminish the part of us that's still committed to worrying and find ourselves caught in that, that's fine, but that we're really up to developing and exploring this other avenue of our own humanity and creating opportunities to explore that. That really is sort of the bottom line point of the conversation that Bill is so much a part of, is the element of preference. Like, I really do know the worry and control game, and I've spent plenty of time and energy, trying to master and conquer and so forth and so on. Now I'm much more intrigued by the other version. Let's go the other way for a little while and see where that brings us. And I think for you and I, that's really the bigger game.
Yeah. I'm not denying the menu, that in my personal conscious menu there is chicken and fish. I'm not denying one or the other, but I am more and more willing to choose fish in one moment or chicken in one moment, and not to... wow, my whole metaphor just broke down. But not to... but
I love that too. Again, we kind of point back to what we're doing in this exact moment.
Yeah.
That the show is an improv.
Yeah.
That we've prepared a whole life for it, and now we're here, and we know enough. Last seminar, that conversation, we've done enough where we can have an organic conversation and let it flow. And in moments, look, a metaphor will break down. Okay, that's fine. We there's enough in the space that we've created vis-a-vis this thing we've imagined called cutting edge consciousness into being, and keep reimagining into being.
But
it'll get windy sometimes.
You want to be able to make a conscious choice that has to do with preference, and at the same time is not in denial of other choices, including the constrictive ones. You want to be aware that they are there, otherwise they do come out you. You don't want to deny your shadow. You do want to embrace it. And once embraced, you're free to choose chicken or fish. There, I salvaged the metaphor. Just under the wire, because we've come to the end of another program with you all. We are grateful for your to have you tuning in and listening. We're grateful for your feedback always. Freeman, I'm looking forward to seeing you here in studio again next week.
And I am as well. And for those of you watching, listening, however you're receiving this, we look forward to seeing you again next week here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.